So, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
After the weekend break, looks like we are more than before. Is that possible? Of course, yes, madam. Yes, that's at least one lady, Shekhar's mother. And you? Oh, yes. You're from Varanasi or from where?
No, I am from Gorakhpur. It is very
Yes,
close to
Gorakhpur.
Varanasi. I met you.
Yes, well, you told me. It's within near the Buddhist circus, not circus, circle, circuit. This. So anyway, Gorakhpur, yeah, I remember. So anyway, our topic is getting deeper into the meditation, step by step maybe, but rather intuitively and not methodically, like we are going to do this step and then we're going to do that step. I think that is rather boring. And also in an interactive way, I may say a few words and then we can have a discussion also. As you may remember that if you want to divide meditation into just two types, although there are many, many different kinds of meditation, but if you want to simplify it, then you can think of meditation in two types. One is the tranquility meditation, that which leads the mind to become calm and quiet only, and the other meditation called the insight meditation or vipassana meditation, based on the Satipatthana Sutta of the Buddha, the development of mindfulness. So in the case of development of concentration and tranquility, and maybe also psychic powers, if you're interested in that, supposedly, then the methods are many. And in different religions, they have found different ways of getting the mind to become calm and quiet. Like, for instance, in Hinduism, you find the Yoga Sutras, isn't it, from Patanjali, who gives the eight steps to get into samadhi by, well, first kind of ethics, yama and niyama, to do and not to do things, and then the right posture, then breathing exercise with pranayama, then getting more into the concentration and longer concentration, and finally being in what is called dhyana or in samadhi. And that is called then yoga, the unification of body, mind and spirit in a way. That is one expression and one particular method of developing the mind into tranquility. And one sentence which comes at the very beginning of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, is Chitta Vritti Nirodha Yoga. That means that when the mind or what you call the thought waves come to a standstill, that is yoga. Now, how do these thought waves come to a standstill? That is an interesting question, isn't it? How do you get your mind to stop thinking, for instance? Is that possible in the first place? And if possible, how do you do it? Or if it's not possible, then what to do? So those are some questions that one can ask and talk about also in our discussion. In the tranquility meditation many types of Buddhism and Hinduism, they use techniques which actually focus your mind on one chosen object. It may be an external object by looking at, for instance, a candle. They call it trataka, no? Tratak. To stare at something and keep that in mind, and if other kind of thoughts or objects come, just go back to that and get into that particular object. Or it could be an internal object, maybe developing the mind to an extent where you get a what is called a sign of maybe some light, like a star or a moon disk or a sun disk in your third eye, and then staring at that from your inner eye and keeping that in mind as much as possible, and then get more and more and more fixed into that object. And then you might experience some kind of bliss through tranquility meditation. Bliss is one thing, but there is this title of a book, A Meditator's Handbook by Ajahn Brahm. Brahm is short for Brahmavamso. He's an Englishman living in Australia. And Ajahn is I would say, a bastardization of the word Acharya. Since the Thai cannot pronounce the R and the, they say Ajahn instead of Acharya. So Acharya Brahmavamso or Ajahn Brahm, he has written this book, Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond. So there may be something beyond bliss in that case. So in the methods that I just mentioned about developing tranquility and concentration of mind on a chosen object, you may get into that blissful state of mind, and then as long as you keep that concentration, that bliss may be there, and when you get out of the meditation, that bliss may linger on for some time, but it may not last forever. So that is why it is, according to what the Buddha experienced during his search for truth, during the 6 years of his ascetic practices, he had yoga teachers and meditation masters who taught him the art of concentration, deep concentration. Alaraka Lama was one, and Ramaputra was another one, and both of those teachers could not teach him beyond a certain point. What was called the eighth dhyana, the level of concentration where actually the body is so still, it doesn't need food for a week, for instance. You don't need to move. You don't hear anything. Even if 500 carts of horses would pass by, that person doesn't hear anything. I don't know how safe that is, anyway. But it seems that your senses are closed off and you're just absorbed in that whatever object it may be, that of your choice. And then you come out of that, and then what I would say is probably you're back to square one, because according to my and not only mine but impression is that this state of bliss is a temporary state. It depends on your concentration, and when the concentration is gone, you're back to where you were. But has it really changed your mind, in the sense of, has it purified the mind from its impurities like greed, hatred and delusion, and basically ignorance or avidya or moha? Well, probably not. That's the view. And when Prince Siddhartha was searching for truth during those 6 years and he met those teachers, they couldn't teach him anymore, and he thought there must be something beyond this. But he didn't quite know what it was until he found it under the tree in Bodh Gaya, like the Bodhi tree, or the Ficus religiosa, now it's called. By the way, that tree, according to an encyclopedia I saw in Holland, gives off a certain vibration that when you sit under it, it stimulates the medulla oblongata, which is the pineal gland under the small brain. And isn't it, Doctor? Yeah. And that vibration stimulates that gland and makes the brain more active or brighter. So it is literally a tree of enlightenment, which became the Bodhi tree, of which the first one was where the Buddha sat under. But of course there were many trees like that, but that one became a historical tree because of the Buddha sitting under it. And a branch of that was sent to Sri Lanka by the daughter of King Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka's daughter, Sanghamitta. She brought that to Sri Lanka, and that branch is still alive, but being supported, and there's a new tree growing under it as well. But so that is a very important event, namely that the Buddha sat down under that tree with a resolution: I'm not going to move from here until I have found the truth. And what is the truth? Well, that is another question, of course. But he realized something which is called the Paticca Samuppada. I mentioned the other day Paticca Samuppada, and the way that His Holiness the Dalai Lama pronounces it with his lips hardly moving, maybe because of the cold in Tibet, I said, remember? But anyway, Paticca Samuppada is a law of cause and effect, where the different factors are influencing each other, and it is called the 12 links of together arising, or dependent origination, it is also called Paticca Samuppada. And it starts with ignorance, or avidya, or moha, delusion. That is, because there is delusion, that is the formula. This is what the Buddha discovered, right? Sitting under the tree. Because of delusion, he said, I have been going around in this cycle of samsara for so many lifetimes because of delusion. And I have been the builder of this house, namely through delusion. The house means body and mind, in this case. So, because of delusion, we create karma. And because of karma, we create what is called a kind of rebirth consciousness. We want something to happen. We want more things to see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. So because of that karma and kind of becoming, a kind of craving for becoming, first of all, we need to express that karma in a certain way. Without a body and mind, you cannot experience your previous karma, you cannot create fresh karma, so you need body and mind. And because of this process, the body and mind seem to go together after the rebirth linking consciousness is there, and then it depends. This, what is called Paticca Samuppada, can be seen in different ways. One is from life to life, or from moment to moment. So if it is from life to life, it is like from the moment of death consciousness till the rebirth linking consciousness. Or if it's from moment to moment, it could be just any moment in lifetime that leads to the next. Because of the ignorance, we get this kind of craving for more, and therefore we create karma, and we get impulses, or how do you call it, impressions through the senses. We are born with eyes and ears, nose, tongue, body and mind. So these impressions, they come to us and they create what is called feelings, Vedana. Those feelings are either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, and usually we crave for more pleasant, isn't it? So craving for the feelings leads to a kind of what is called becoming, bhava, and that bhava, that becoming, that process of becoming, leads to what is called rebirth. And when there's rebirth, there is a continuation of basically of unsatisfactoriness or dukkha. In samsara, it's never 100% perfect, never 100% pleasant or happy. There's happiness and unhappiness, a mixture of that in all the levels of existence. So therefore, the Buddha said, if this is, that comes to be. If this is not, that doesn't come to be. So if there would be no ignorance, there would be no all these becoming and rebirths, etc. So it is basically the ignorance or avidya, not seeing the things as they really are, that obstructs our freedom from the wheel of life and death, samsara. So what is that ignorance according to Buddhism? Not to see the things as they really are. That is, we project something like permanence onto impermanent things. Everything is basically impermanent, as we most know. Some things are more permanent than others, like a flower may be only lasting for a few hours. If you pluck it, it's finished. Our body may be lasting for 70, 80, 90 years, but it is also not permanent. It's changing all the time. And we don't always want to accept that. So therefore we project some kind of permanence onto impermanent things. And if we think, for instance, we are body and feelings and mind objects, then you might think, well, my body is impermanent, that we can accept. My feelings are impermanent, that also we know. And then the thoughts and consciousness, well, the thoughts are impermanent, let's put it that way. But then people start to project something permanent onto the consciousness. Isn't it, madam? We hope that consciousness is permanent. Well, there may be something, I don't want to say that it's not, there may be something different from this individual consciousness beyond. So that's probably what one is pointing out, but at least as an individual stream of consciousness, that consciousness is also not permanent. And therefore, if we think it is permanent, then we are sort of fooling ourselves. That is the kind of what is called avidya. And also everything conditioned is dukkha. Sabbe sankhara dukkha. All the conditioned things are a form of unsatisfactoriness. In the old days they used to say dukkha is suffering, but nowadays we found that suffering is not the right translation for dukkha. It is unsatisfactoriness. It's never 100% complete or ideal. Therefore, all the conditioned things are dukkha or unsatisfactory. But we are searching for happiness in those unsatisfactory things. We have to then learn to see what is maybe worldly happiness and otherworldly happiness. If we confuse the worldly happiness with otherworldly happiness or real happiness, then we are always chasing after fleeting happiness, and we may say, oh, I spent so much money on this dinner, but now it's gone, or something like that. Or you go on a holiday to Hawaii, for instance, thinking that heaven is there, and then you come back and say, it was okay, but it's finished. And so that seeking of happiness, searching for happiness in the worldly things is not the right attitude, and it is based on also ignorance, not seeing the unsatisfactory nature of all conditioned things. That doesn't mean that we are not supposed to enjoy life, worldly things, but with the right understanding. So there is then less craving and less attachment, and therefore less suffering. maybe you can, after I stop talking, put any kind of remark or question. The third one that we say the Buddha also discovered as sign of existence is the sign of non-self, and that is a little bit difficult one. He said all things, that means all conditioned things and the unconditioned. What he called the unconditioned is actually nirvana. There's only one unconditioned thing, that is nirvana. All the other things under the sun, I don't know, beyond the sun also probably, but are basically what you call all the things they have no eternal, everlasting, unchanging self, according to the Buddha. Whatever is unchanging is not your self. It is something, what is called the unconditioned. He calls it the unconditioned. It is something that we can realize. It is something that is within oneself. It may be also outside of yourself. We don't know exactly where it is, but it can be realized from within, and it is called the unconditioned or nirvana. It's unborn, and it is also undying. So they call it, asankata dharma, that is an unconditioned something. It is, how do you call it now in the Pali and Sanskrit languages, there are words for non-dying, amrutam, no? It's amrutam, and unborn. I forget the word for it. Anyway, it is not born, it is not dying, and it is not conditioned. But what it is exactly, one has to find out for oneself. There are some positive terms that the Buddha gave to nirvana, namely, it is the highest happiness, that you find also in the Sanskrit form of the word for the highest happiness. Let's see.
Ananda.
Yeah, it is kind of ananda, but there's another word for it that I'm trying to find out. And then it is the deepest security also. It can be felt as real security, but it's not like having money in the bank or a policy with the insurance company. That kind of security is not real security. So that nirvana gives a feeling of real security and real peace and real happiness, which cannot be described in human terms in a way. So basically, the formula of this paticca-samuppada goes like, if that ignorance would not be there, then this kind of chain of 12 causes and effects would also not come, especially the becoming and the rebirth and the going on in the samsara. That is basically what is meant, that he discovered that sitting under the tree, and he said, this is my final birth. It is said that as a small baby boy, the Prince Siddhartha already said that. This is my final life. There's no more birth after this. I am the Buddha. Whether we can believe that or not, just after birth, whether he was able to say that, but in the movie Siddhartha the Buddha, you can see that also in the stories about the Buddha, it is mentioned like that. Maybe you would like to put some questions or points that you would like to discuss. Yes, please.
So, about consciousness, do you know if it's unchanging or does it change, or is that like an opinion, or not sure?
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's of course a very intelligent question. Whether consciousness is not changing or changing. Well, as far as the individual, what we call the stream of consciousness, you know, the mind basically, which has moments of consciousness filled with seeing and hearing and everything, that is changing all the time. So then the point that you made, Madam, the observer of all that content, whether that is changing all the time or whether that there is another kind of observer which is unchanging, like another consciousness. So the other day I was mentioning that in each moment of consciousness there is a content like seeing or hearing, and together with that there is a feeling, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, and at the same time there is something which is observing that content. That we call consciousness from moment to moment to moment. But whether that is the only, well, according to the Buddha, sorry to say, but that is the only consciousness that exists, those 6 types of consciousness of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touch, and thought.
That's not individual consciousness.
Yeah, that is individual.
When pure consciousness touches the mind, our mind, which is already, which has all the senses and everything, then that becomes individual consciousness. That finishes with the body-mind continuum. When you die, it finishes.
Really?
Individual consciousness, because it was the mind had borrowed it from pure consciousness. That, but the pure consciousness, that is just consciousness, nothing else, nothing to do with me, mine, or whatever.
Right.
Nothing. That pure consciousness is always there, inside as well as outside. That is, they say that it is, it's not that we have consciousness inside, we are existing in consciousness. There's no consciousness, there's no world, nothing.
Yeah.
That pure consciousness is all.
Yeah. Just yesterday or the day before in my Facebook, I saw that scientists are now believing that the universe is full of consciousness. Yeah. So that may be true. But then when you say that the individual borrows the consciousness, its consciousness, from the universal consciousness,
They
then
give an example like if you keep a ball of iron near the fire, it takes the heat and it takes all the quality of the fire. It's like a burning red ball. But the moment it is separated from there, when it gets cold, it comes back to its own original self. There's no fire, there's no heat in it. But fire always has heat and light in it.
yeah.
So that's an example.
Except that that fire also needs to be lit up. That is not an eternal fire. Yes, it's a little example.
Maybe even an example.
Yes.
It's not in totality.
No, of course.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Until.
But then I was wondering if we borrow that, if the individual borrows that from the eternal or conscious or cosmic consciousness, then why doesn't it give it back at the end of the life?
It is taken back. The
Or
consciousness goes, the moment consciousness leaves the body, like that fire is it's separated, that iron ball is separated from the fire.
Yeah.
It's cold.
Yeah.
It's cold and then
Well, for some time it's still hot, but I wouldn't try to. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. Well, it makes sense, but you have some additional information.
Adding to this, why do we think that there are individuals, there are units, there are objects? Isn't everything just a stream, undivided, and we divide it with our way of seeing, but it doesn't make any difference. So that there is no taking and borrowing and giving back, but it's the illusion is that
that is
I
the
take,
illusion. The
yeah.
taking and giving back is just
an illusion.
temporary.
Yes.
Reality is pure consciousness.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's
Well, I would say you tell that to Mr. Trump.
I don't talk to him. I don't.
Oh, you don't talk to him. Yeah. You know, if we're all one, why do we So that is something maybe true, but it's so difficult for, well, the majority of people will not understand that, I suppose. That's why we're all here as kind of individuals. It may be true in the higher sense of the truth. There may be, yeah, okay. So there are different levels of truth, we could say. Kind of relative truth, and then the higher truth, and maybe the absolute truth. So in the absolute truth, maybe everything is really one, but we believe that we're separate. That's also the case of the example in Advaita, I think, which they give, no? That an individual pot might think that it has separate air, whereas the air is one, and we don't realize that this air is just one. So something like that. But still, on the other hand, we all do operate as individuals. Like, otherwise, why should we buy a house or rent a house and go to that particular house and, that particular husband or that particular whatever? We do operate also on the individual relative reality.
That is the language of the world.
Yes.
Yes, but it creates a false reality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, false reality, or I would say it is just what is called the relative reality, which is also a kind of reality. It can't be sort of denied.
Yeah, in Hindi we call it Vyavharik Satya. Vyavharik Satya, it is like pot is a Vyavharik Satya, but mud is the truth. Made from mud, you can use it. When it breaks again, it goes back to mud.
Oh yeah. Farid Satya is the relative truth. And what is the absolute truth then? Parma, we call
For
it...
example, it is mud.
Mud, oh I see. We have in Buddhism the Paramartha Satya is the higher or absolute truth, and the Sammutti Satya is the relative truth.
Paramarthik Satya.
Yeah.
In Hindi they call it Paramarthik.
Yeah,
Absolute.
yeah, the absolute truth. In Pali and Sanskrit also. Yes, please.
So I like to make a commentary on all of this little language of philosophy. So what my understanding of this is that 2,500 years ago, what Buddha said was true of the cause and effect of, and this dukkha, anatta, and anicca, these are facts.
Anicca.
Anicca, these are definitely facts, and they can be proven by our lives. But what I think what philosophy has done is has studied this further. Now, I don't mean all the people in the 20th century. I mean the masters who gave us the secret doctrine, Blavatsky, and it's written in the doctrine that whatever they have written is through a mutual collaboration of many meditation masters. And what they are talking about, of course, it's been like this Jivatma and Paramatma, the business of us having many lives and there being one oversoul. And all of us going towards that oversoul is something which has been written in the secret doctrine as part of the program, and it's sort of one of the proven things according to the masters. Now the masters themselves are Buddhists. They are followers of Buddha. They are part of the White Brotherhood. So all of this, somewhere, when we discuss all this, there seems to be a little speculation. We could go with what Buddha says, we could go with what theosophy says. And what I'm thinking in my mind is that to a large extent, theosophy is modern Buddhism. It's a development of Buddhism. For instance, the aspect that that humans could be reborn as anything is totally denied by theosophical literature. They say that once man, only man. After that, many times, but only man. So I don't know. It seems logical also. when you think about it, that the development of these defects in a man is not there in an animal. An animal is not greedy, is not this, is not that. But men have numerous defects. So unless he keeps on taking birth as men, he will not be able to clear all the defects in one birth or two births. It will take a long time to polish that stone or whatever that thing is inside him. So this is just a commentary. I'm just commenting, but this is my commentary on these aspects.
Right.
That perhaps theosophy has to be studied with more scientific understanding.
Okay. Now I'm trying to remember some of the things that you said. One thing towards the end that, according to theosophy, once you are at the level of mankind, that you do not fall back to any lower existence, and Buddhism says you can be born in any realm of existence. Well, it depends on one's actions. And there were actually, during the time of the Buddha, two types of sects who believed that if you act like a cow, you eat like a cow, you moo like a cow, and you behave like a cow, that you would be born in heaven. And the other sect says, if you are acting like a dog, and you eat like a dog, and you woof like a dog, and you behave like a dog, you would go to heaven. So the Buddha said, well, if you behave like a cow, and you act like a cow, you eat like a cow or like a dog, you'll be reborn as a cow or a dog, basically. That's one thing where he says, going down the ladder of existence, levels of existence, where there's more suffering, basically, as animals than as human beings. Human beings have a mixture of happiness and unhappiness. Maybe because of good karma from the past, they did get that rebirth as a human being, and then they have to sort of defend that level also, not to go down. And according to Buddha's teachings, if you meditate and you attain what is called the level of stream entry, the first level of what is called the path towards nirvana, not the psychic powers, but the levels of enlightenment, the first level is the level of stream entry, then there is a guarantee, in a way, that you do not go down anymore, and that there will be a maximum of 7 more lifetimes as a human being, maybe less, to sort of come to the nirvana. Unless, of course, you are a bodhisattva, which is also possible. The path of the bodhisattva would mean that you choose to be reborn again and again and again, not because you like samsara so much, but in order to help a lot of people, basically, or beings. But it still does not deny that it is, impossible to go lower in birth than a human being. Buddha says you can, you may. And then you may wonder, well, how is it possible for them then to come up again on the scale? There may be some previous good karma that will then fructify at a certain time and make you come back as a human being. But animals as such seem not to be able to do that. Although in what is called the Jataka stories, the stories of the rebirth, previous lives of the Buddha, you find that he was also at certain times born as an animal, as a deer, as a snake, as a monkey, and he has done as a bodhisattva in that existence also several good kind of deeds. He was not an ordinary monkey as most others, for instance. But yes, please.
From your present statement, something came to my mind. The Bodhisattva has a possibility. He is powerful enough to be born as a monkey or something. I wonder whether ordinary people can choose to be born as a monkey or a snake or anything.
Yeah, I don't know if I would like to be born as an orang-utan in Borneo. But yeah, this is going to be extinct maybe, but still. Maybe as a cat in California, I wouldn't mind.
Because there are some stories, these are only stories, I don't know how they're true or not, but they are interesting. They say like if you go to Ramanashram, they say there are siddhas. Siddha can be in any form. He can be a man, he can be a dog, he can be anything. So this comes from what you were saying, that human mind can go back. But a bodhisattva remains a bodhisattva even if he is born a dog.
So then to be a dog in the Ramanama ashram, that is quite a... Maybe people start worshipping the dogs there also, or not really?
So they are saying at that place around the hill.
Oh, the hill, yeah, this Arunachal.
Ashram.
Yeah. And not
The
inside the
stories.
room, okay.
One doesn't know how true they are or totally false. One doesn't know that.
Yeah, that's speculation. But anyway, it's good anyhow to be good to animals. Did you? Yes, please.
Did I interrupt you?
No, well, I was going to say, did you see that in Australia, after the bushfires, and 1.5 billion, animals have died. Now the surviving ones, they are feeding by dropping carrots and sweet potatoes from helicopters and planes, and people are donating money to hire these planes, and they go around all the places because otherwise those animals would be starving. Yeah.
But these are only the cuddly ones. What about the milliards of insects which are not really nice? You don't feel like cuddling an ant which dies in the fire.
Yeah.
Koalas are lovely to look at, but
Yes.
really we shouldn't differentiate between
Yes.
or on a scale of how cuddly an animal is.
Yeah.
But they're doing their best, and what can be saved, they're trying to save.
Yeah, I don't know how we could help the ants in the burnt fires. But anyway, Finland, maybe Mr. Finland. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to hold my thoughts together here, but it's just that this theosophy thing and what came to my mind. If, as I've learned now, there is in theosophy this belief of us humans, as we are born as humans, we cannot show love, and this is the topic. So I was just thinking, if there's this in Western philosophy, there's this tendency in Hegel and all these German philosophers who thought that there's this spirit that evolves maybe in linear time, or I don't know, it feels like this time of this thinking of linear timeline somehow that we develop in that way, and I don't know if that's that Western thinking of wanting to think that we are developing somehow a linear timeline is now penetrating into this Buddha's or this thing that maybe Buddha didn't have the ultimate truth, and now theosophy is developing it into something else or beyond that, but maybe it's just that ego is coming in between or intervening here and thinking.
What is coming in between?
Ego.
Or the ego.
Ego, and thinking that we know now I'm not denying there's different dimensions of truths, but Buddha said that he discovered ultimate truth, and that's it. Like he didn't bring in any other theory or anything, but this is the truth.
Yeah. But he also said you don't have to believe it.
But you don't have to believe it.
He told you you have to discover it for yourself. You can reject it if you find after scrutiny and after thinking about it that it is true and that it is helpful for yourself and for others, then you can accept it. But not because other people said so, or because even the Buddha himself said so. He said, no, you have to find out for yourself. That is what I like in Buddhism.
Yeah, exactly, that's right. I'm not even apparently in the mind of Buddhism or just very much emphasize this through upayas, the Buddhas are finding more and more ways to deepen this
The
jhana.
upayas, yeah, the kind of helpful techniques or what is
all the kind of means to take this truthfulness or forth and eradicate suffering. But it's just this cyclical time, as I understand in Hindu and Buddhist, and I don't know if this
yeah,
is
cyclical.
more like the cyclical understanding of time, and in this Western understanding, I don't know, there's a lot of Western evolved in theosophy and how it started with, so it's more like linear time, and we come from here and we go here, and so
But where does it end?
yeah, where does it end? If the universe is never born and it will never, it's unborn, nirvana is unborn and undying, so how could we ever develop linearly?
Yeah, that doesn't make sense, I think, the linear model. And then, for instance, there's Teilhard de Chardin, right? A French philosopher and priest and paleontologist and all kinds of things. He was saying that there is some kind of movement towards a point called point omega, that the what is called the evolution of humankind is going towards a point of perfection, and then maybe Sri Aurobindo also said something that in the future there will be something like the descent of the divine, the divine, and that there will be kind of perfection. Those are things I find a little bit difficult to digest.
Yeah, but that's what I actually now summarize all this. This is exactly what I also I'm coming to, that in Buddha's animalogic Buddha's understanding makes much more sense in logical sense.
A cyclical time, cyclical or cyclical time, that things go around and around, and there will be, even the Buddha said, that the Maitreya is supposed to be the future Buddha, now waiting as a bodhisattva in a kind of heavenly sphere, until Buddhism has completely gone from this earth, and then when the time comes, he will be the new, maybe world teacher, like. Although he already, as a bodhisattva, spoke maybe through, that is what theosophists believe, he spoke through J. Krishnamurti. This consciousness is somewhere. That's another thing, no? Because the consciousness, no?
Actually, even Buddha never said that there is no God. He said, he just kept quiet. That meant, because once to Krishnamurti also somebody asked, you tell me, is there a God or not? So he said, if I say there is a God, you'll make an authority of it.
Yeah.
If I say there is no God, then again you'll make an authority of it. I want you to find it out for yourself.
Yeah.
Similarly, even Buddha never said anything for or against. He just stopped at a certain point. He said, whatever I had to tell, I told. Rest you do it yourself. So that doesn't mean that he was a Shunyavad, he didn't believe Anatta and all that. We have made out of it. We people, the followers and people later on. But he never said anything. He just stopped at a very right point. Like even in research work, when we have to do some research, we start from null hypothesis. Null hypothesis means we start from there's no relation between this and that. Then we have to find out for ourselves how much relationship there is. So it is just like that. We cannot say it was just a Shunyavad or they believe in God, they don't. These are our small minds making conclusions. But the great people, they just stopped at a certain point. They said, now we'll be silent. Silence. And from silence, the rest will ensue.
I find that, one second, Krishnamurti, while he was talking, you could understand what he was talking about, but there was nothing to sort of hold on to. He would take you up and up, and then he would just sort of drop you and you figure it out yourself, which is actually very good.
That was his time.
Yes. Yes, please.
The clarification. Hinduism says there is karma. You have to meet the karma. You cannot escape from the impact of karma. That is one stand. I want to know whether the Buddhism accepts this concept. Does it say, or does it say we can reduce the impact of karma or past karma, or we can remove the impact of past karma? I think Buddhism has to stand in one way. Whether it says we can remove the impact of our past karma, this is one stand, or we can reduce the impact. Reduce the impact if it is negative. If it is negative karma, there is possibility of reducing it.
I understand what you're saying. Well, in Buddha's teachings, there are different kinds of categories of karma.
Yes.
4 major categories. One is a very little bit of karma, not very harsh, not very strong karma. That one can be overcome in this life. If there's a previous small karma done, it can be overcome by good deeds, for instance. Then there's heavier and heavier, and the heaviest, that's called Karaka Karma. That Karaka Karma means it is a kind of karma which is, for instance, somebody has killed his own father or mother. That kind of karma can never be overcome by any action in a next life. So the results of that particular karma one has to undergo whether one does good things or not. Can try, but it cannot. But certain small karmas can be overcome. So now, for instance, another saying of the Buddha is, you may be born as a Brahmin, but that doesn't mean that you are really a Brahmin. You are a Brahmin because of your action and your thoughts, not because of your birth. So we may say, okay, one may be born as a Brahmin because of some good karma. Nowadays, to be a Brahmin is not always such a good thing, Better to be a scheduled caste or something like that. But anyway, the possibility of getting out of that, in Hinduism is you are born like that, and you cannot change your karma. So if you're born like a Sudra, or you're born a Vaishya, or you're born a Kshatriya or a Brahmin, you have to remain in that. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, you should not change that, otherwise the world becomes chaotic. But that is a very rigid interpretation of karma, I would say. And so the Buddha did say that it is possible to change your fate in a way. It is a matter of, do you believe in fate, or that everything is predestined, or can you change it? Well, there is a possibility, but it needs a lot of effort maybe. And otherwise, you may be able to get out of that pattern by realizing the unconditioned. If you realize the unconditioned, whether you are a Brahmin or a Vaishya or whatever, then you may be able to get out of that pattern of birth and death. Does it make sense, what I'm saying?
Some people remain quite passive. Whatever comes to them, they say it is a threat. They have to accept it. And sometimes it is not good.
Yeah, sometimes it's not good.
If they keep quiet without doing anything, I think that won't help. They have to do something.
Yeah, it depends. Now, for instance, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, in 1956, he became a Buddhist. He was born in the Shudra sort of caste, outcast basically, and he became a Buddhist, and 500,000 people, 5 lakhs of people at Nagpur, at Diksha Bhumi, they all became Buddhists, and now tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people have become Buddhists in the belief that there is a possibility of rejecting the caste system, because the system itself was very rigid. So they don't believe in that anymore. And then the book that Ambedkar has written about the Buddha and his Dhamma also is a very good book, but it doesn't accept the karma and rebirth theory. Maybe one more question and then this tea time. Yes?
Question, but also commentary. The
So,
commentary was like, in the traditional Hinduism, karma and varna, caste which is varna, are different concepts. It does never say that if you have bad karma, you're born as a different caste, and if you're a good karma, you can be born with good karma in any caste. And during the time of the Buddha, there was a problem with traditional Hinduism, yes, which is why he also rebelled against it. But it wasn't always like that. For example, the Gita categorically says that the caste is not what you are born in, but who you become. So even in the Gita directly, Krishna says that Brahmin is not born. It's somebody depending on your gunas and your attitude. So somewhere, because of the Buddhism and Buddha's understanding, and he sort of misunderstood that maybe because both the Brahmanism then was not so great, it was sort of degenerated, but also he wasn't traditionally educated. So he had an idea of what is a system, but never really was educated in that, so he didn't know. So it is his sort of, so Buddha doesn't get that part about Hinduism very correctly. And it is right that in certain times the Varna system, the caste system has become rigid, especially in times of the Gupta period, which was much more post-Buddha actually. So there are times in history where the caste system becomes rigid because of the monarchy really and how the king enforces laws. But there are times in the Indian history, in the Hindu history, where it's not so rigid. Where you intermarry and intermarriage becomes another caste and jatis. Mostly the varna is based on what you do.
sorry.
And not particularly necessarily how the karma manifests. Especially in Tamil Nadu, there's a lot of Shaivite and Vaishnavite saints who are not considered upper caste or anything. They are quite they are quite, so anyway, so that is just the commentary. I mean, in some sense, yeah, but I agree that it is gotten rigid lately. In the 1900s, it was rigid. There were many issues with women, with the rigid caste. There were many issues, and that could have been also because of the fact that they had to enforce something against what they saw as outside religion. So all sorts of reasons. But anyway, my question to you was, I would like to learn from you, what are the ways Buddhism says can resolve karma? One of it you mentioned was good deeds. How, and meditation may be second one, and a few other ways.
Well, I suppose that those are, good deeds and meditation are two. I don't know many others. In one's actions, for instance, there is an example, for instance, that the Buddha asked for some water from his assistant, Ananda. And Ananda said, "Oh, but this well is being used by untouchables." He said, "I didn't ask for caste, I asked for water." That kind of thing, to overcome that kind of understanding or misunderstanding. And in the palace also where Prince Siddhartha grew up, after seeing the population with his 4 rides through the town and seeing the suffering and all that kind of thing, he brought new rules to the palace. For instance, poor children were sitting on the floor and richer children were sitting higher, and he made them all sit together and eating at the same level. Things like that to sort of break down the caste system. But overcoming karma itself, well, I would have to look it up. I suppose there are certain theories about that, how to overcome karma, but it's mainly something to do with willpower and understanding, and to base your actions on fresh what is called chetanas, your intentions. If you change your intentions, you change your karma, and you change your sort of destiny. But how free we are in that completely is yet another question. I would say it's 9:30 already, more than 9:30, tea time, and after the tea, basically by 10 o'clock, we will have a group photograph. And if you have your own camera, maybe we can ask George, otherwise we could send these photos to everybody. There's another idea that I got, I don't know whether that is a good idea. We could start a School of the Wisdom WhatsApp group, and then one person could send a photograph to all others or something like that, and announcements. So think about it, whether you would like that idea. Then we could create a WhatsApp group on what is called the School of the Wisdom.